Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever feel like there is more than one way to look at a problem, and maybe even more than one right answer? Well, this fascinating paper dives deep into that very idea when it comes to science itself. This paper explores a really neat concept called multimodal inference. Think of it like this. Imagine you are trying to answer a scientific question. There might be many different paths or analyses you could take to get to an answer based on all sorts of tiny decisions you make along the way. Multimodal inference looks at what happens when many different researchers, or even one researcher trying out many possibilities, analyze the same data using different but still reasonable methods. The authors here are asking a big question. Does seeing the same result across many different analyses mean that result is definitely true? Or does it just show us that we're still unsure about the best way to even ask the question in the first place? They argue that while seeing variation across different analyses can highlight uncertainty about how to test a hypothesis, it can't replace the solid evidence needed to actually justify those testing methods. So, the core idea here is that you can have a research question, and then you have to turn that question into a specific testable prediction. To do this, scientists make what they call auxiliary assumptions. These are like the necessary building blocks that connect the big theory to the actual experiment. For example, if you are testing if a new drug makes people happier, an auxiliary assumption might be how you measure happiness, or what kind of participants you select, or even which statistical model you use to analyze the results. The problem, as the authors point out, is that sometimes we don't have strong reasons to believe these auxiliary assumptions are correct. This is especially true in new areas of research. If we're not sure which assumptions are the right ones, it creates a lot of uncertainty about how to even design a fair test. And when you add in the pressure to publish and get those exciting results, there is a risk that researchers might pick the assumptions that happen to give them the result they want. To deal with this uncertainty, the paper presents two main ideas. The first is to try and reduce all these choices or degrees of freedom that a researcher has. This means doing the hard work beforehand to figure out which auxiliary assumptions are actually warranted or well supported, maybe by doing lots of smaller studies or triangulation across different methods. Once you've done that groundwork, you write down exactly what you're going to do in an analysis plan, ideally before you even see the data. This is often done through something called pre-registration. The second approach, which is what multimodal inference is all about, is different. Instead of trying to limit the choices, this approach accepts that there might be many plausible ways to analyze data. So researchers look at what happens if they use all these different, but still reasonable analytic paths. This is sometimes called multiverse analysis or specification curve analysis. The idea is that if you get a similar result no matter which of these plausible paths you take, then you can be more confident in your conclusion. If the results jump all over the place, it suggests there is a lot of uncertainty about how to properly test the hypothesis. But here is where the authors really dig in. They argue that the first approach, the one that focuses on justifying the assumptions, is better. They believe that just because you see a consistent result across many different analyses, it doesn't automatically make that result trustworthy. It is like if a group of people are all biased against someone, they might all agree that the person is guilty. But that agreement doesn't make them innocent or guilty. The agreement is based on flawed reasoning. Similarly, if all the different analyses in a multimodal inference are built on shaky or unwarranted assumptions, then agreement between them doesn't mean much. They make a key distinction between two types of uncertainty. There's aleatoric uncertainty, which is the randomness that is just part of nature, like the natural variation in people's heights. This is the kind of uncertainty that statistical tools like confidence intervals are good at handling. Then there is epistemic uncertainty. This is uncertainty that comes from us not having enough information, like not knowing which variables to include in our study. The authors argue that multimodal inference often treats epistemic uncertainty, the uncertainty about how to test something, as if it were aleatoric uncertainty. The uncertainty inherent in the data itself, and that is a problem. They really stress that consistency across a bunch of analyses that are all based on questionable assumptions doesn't magically make the conclusion true. It is like everyone in a class guessing the answer to a tough math problem using different but flawed methods. If they all get the same wrong answer, it doesn't mean the answer is right. The key is to have sound, well-tested methods. The paper uses a great analogy from the movie 12 Angry Men in the movie. 11 jurors initially vote guilty, but one juror, played by Henry Fonda, starts to question the evidence. He doesn't just accept the majority opinion. Instead, he meticulously goes through each piece of evidence. asking if it is truly reliable and if it really supports the conclusion. The paper argues that just like the jury's initial majority vote wasn't necessarily right, a consistent result across many analyses doesn't guarantee accuracy if those analyses aren't built on solid ground. They highlight a study where many researchers analyzed the same dataset about whether skin color affected referees giving red cards in soccer. Even though everyone was looking at the same data, they used different analytical choices. Some groups found no effect, while others did. The authors argue that if the choices made by those analysts weren't based on good reasons, then the disagreement or agreement among them doesn't tell us much about whether skin color actually influences red cards. The real question is whether the assumptions behind each analysis were correct. They make a strong case that the goal shouldn't be to find results that are robust or consistent across many possibly flawed analyses. Instead, the goal should be to find the single correct way to test a hypothesis, based on well-supported assumptions. They state directly that there is only one correct test. This doesn't mean every theory has just one way it can be tested, but that once you've done the hard work to validate your assumptions, and you've chosen a specific empirical test, there is a right way to implement that test statistically. The paper acknowledges that multimodal inference can be useful, but primarily in a diagnostic way. It can help show us where the uncertainty lies. It can reveal which analytic decisions are most influential and might be worth investigating further. But it is not a substitute for the rigorous work of validating those assumptions. They suggest that instead of embracing variability, researchers should actively try to resolve uncertainty about their auxiliary assumptions through dedicated research. Ultimately, the authors believe that the current popularity of multimodal inference might be a response to concerns about scientists deliberately choosing analyses that yield desirable results. But they warn that just showing all the different possible paths doesn't solve the problem of potentially flawed paths. It might just hide the problem or make it even more confusing. They say that embracing all this uncertainty is like jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. The paper concludes with a call to action for scientists to invest more in the empirical groundwork needed to figure out the best ways to test their hypotheses. This means systematically testing those auxiliary assumptions, just like we test theoretical claims. By doing this, we can move closer to having a clear understanding of what makes a test valid for a given theory. Even though we'll never be perfectly certain about everything in science, we can certainly reduce uncertainty about how to conduct our tests. So what does this mean for us? It is a powerful reminder that science is a process of trying to understand the world as accurately as possible. When we see research, it is important to remember that the conclusions are often based on a whole series of assumptions and decisions. While variation in results can be interesting, it is the underlying justification for those analytical choices that truly matters. This paper encourages us to think critically about how scientific knowledge is built and to value the careful, rigorous work that goes into validating the very tools we use to discover new things. It pushes us to consider that perhaps, in the end, there truly is one best way to test a scientific idea. And our job as scientists is to find it through diligent investigation. What are your thoughts on this? Does it change how you think about scientific studies? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a like, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained simply. And hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the fascinating world of the mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.